So when it comes to the lustful milk gag, I've talked about this several times over. And heck, I even did a history of the lustful milk gag video. First, it was a series of videos, and I pieced them together as one video. You can check it out here on my channel. But as I was watching Animat's top 10 weirdest animated films, one of the things that got to me was, one of the things I was thinking about, I should say, if you will, that got to me was the lustful milk gag for some reason, and the different variations of that gag that pretty much happen, or pretty much are seen on the screen. And I look at the fact that there are actually five variations. There's 4 to 5, but I'm looking at 5. Now you might ask yourself, well, what are those variations? Well, let me tell you. The first one is known as a partial melt. And the partial melt is basically when a character melts into a puddle, but parts of them, like their head and their arms and the legs, or at least maybe a leg or an arm and a head, remain. A good example of this is the character Vanna in the Sidekicks cartoon. When a new character, kind of a suave-like character, sweet talks her, she melts, and then what you see as a result is her lying in a puddle of herself, but her feet is sticking out one end, arms sticking out the other, and then her head is just sticking up, just remains there, looking up, smiling, and then like her hair and a mascara, I guess you could say, is running down, melting down as well. And you kind of see her continuously melt a little bit more, like she's melting more into the puddle. That's basically a partial melt, where you get more than just, like, let's say the head or something like that. A semi-melt is kind of an evolved version of a partial melt. The semi-melt is basically when a character does almost a complete meltdown, except their head or even their mouth remains, intact, and they're still able to communicate. A pop-up melt is when a character does a complete meltdown, but they're able to reform and pop up back to normal or into any shape they want. A good example of that is Zoe in the Goof High live-action cartoon series. When she melts into a puddle of water, then reforms. And Minerva Mink in Meet Minerva, when she melts literally through the arms of her best friend's cousin, I should say, and then reforms herself as an obnoxious bullhorn. That's a pop-up melt. Now, what's number 2? Number 2 is basically what I would call El Natural Melt. Now, an El Natural Melt is basically when a character melts into a puddle and is treated as a natural puddle. In other words, when a character melts, they literally become a puddle, I should say. They're treated as a natural puddle, like people running through them, stomping on them, you name it. A good example of this is Europe in 30 Minutes, when Babs does a meltdown, does a lustful melt, or sort of a kind of a lustful melt gag, and she melts into a pink puddle, and she doesn't reform until after her friends run through her or step on her like she's a regular puddle of water. Only then does she reform. That's an El Natural melt, if you will, or El Natural melt, if you will. Then, of course, number 1 is the complete melt. A complete melt is basically when a character does a complete lustful melt, a complete meltdown, if you will, into a puddle, or completely melted, period. And it takes another character to reform them. Good example of this, Acme Bowl with Plucky doing it, in the hot tub of the rival team, who in reality he was actually duping on the behalf of his school, and it was part of Buster's plan kind of deal. But yeah, basically that's kind of an example there, because the captain of the rival team has to use a cup, a glass cup to scoop them up and pour them back, out back to normal. And Plucky's like, what, who, what, where? That's an example there. Another example is Moon over Minerva. And the reason this is an example is because Minerva, when she does it here, it takes Wilford in his werewolf alter ego to pick her up, wring her out like a towel to, basically restore her. And I've joked around several times that, she had become so melted, in that state that Wilford could have easily gone off to the city, got something to eat, go see a movie, come back about 2-3 hours later, and Minerva would still be lying on the ground as a complete melted puddle because she was that far gone. And as I've mentioned before, somebody that tried to portray Minerva on Facebook, being a fan of hers, who would name, certain individuals as fans of the week, she answered a question, or the person portraying her on Facebook answered the question about, the lustful melt, about that moment. And basically their answer was, it was like going into a deep sleep, going into a nap, if you will. So basically, long story short though, that is what a complete meltdown is. When a character completely melts and it takes another to reform them, or it's to a point that, like I joked with Minerva and Wilford, somebody could walk off, or the other character can walk off, do some other things for a couple of hours, come back, and the character would still be in the melted state. Overall, when I look at the lustful melt gag, like I said, I've talked about it before, done the history of video of it, and it's just one of those unique kind of gags that you can look at and you could have different variations to go along with it. And to me, these are the 5 ones that I look at. Like I said, I look at a partial melt, a semi-melt, a pop-up melt, an al naturel melt, and a complete melt. That's how I look at them. And those basically being the variations of the gag itself. But what do you guys think? Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments, as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video, check out the Teespring store, or check me out at BW Roses on Venmo. BW Roses discussions all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. Also check me out at Patreon at BW Roses and on Venmo if you want to help donate there. So until next time, guys, I will talk to you all later.